Opening slide, Money Matters with the Wealthsimple Foundation. CNIB logo. Registered versus non-registered accounts.
Hi, my name is Danica Frappier. I'm a member of CNIB's National Youth Council. And as we seek to raise awareness about financial literacy, I'm so happy to be joined today by Scheherazade Hasan from Wealthsimple. Welcome, Shez.
Thank you so much for having me here, Danica.
So before we dive into today's topic, I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about the Wealthsimple Foundation and your role at Wealthsimple.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Wealthsimple Foundation is a registered Canadian charity. And the aim of the foundation ultimately is to remove financial barriers to post-secondary education for children from low to modest income families. My role at Wealthsimple is as an associate portfolio manager. And so my day-to-day really consists of speaking with clients from all walks of life about their personal financial situations, educating them and advising them on how they can get closer to achieving their financial goals.
Great, thank you. So today's topic is registered accounts. And I'm so happy that we're talking about this because often we'll hear acronyms like RRSP, TFSA, and some people might not know exactly what these acronyms mean and how these account types can actually work to their advantage. So let's start off by distinguishing registered accounts versus non-registered accounts. So can you give us sort of the main differences between the two and when should someone use one account over the other?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. So essentially, a registered account comes with various tax benefits that are offered by the government. And they usually vary depending on the type of registered account that you open. They could look like, an income tax deduction based on your deposits to the registered account, or earning income and growth in the account completely tax-free. Registered accounts do usually have a limit to how much you can deposit into it, just so that you're not skipping taxes on all your money, even if you happen to max out your limits at all. On the other hand, non-registered accounts have no such tax benefits, and so no limits on them either. You are responsible for paying tax on the income that you earn in the account, and you would pay tax on the growth of the account.
Okay, thanks. So earlier I mentioned those different acronyms, and I know they represent different registered account types. So could you give us a general overview of the different registered accounts, starting with the TFSA, so the tax-free savings account?
Of course, yeah. So the big benefit of a TFSA is that anything that you earn in the account is not subject to tax. But there's a limit of how much you can actually deposit to the account, usually referred to as our contribution room. You start to earn contribution room from either the year you turned 18, the year you became a resident in Canada, or 2009, the year that the TFSAs were introduced, whichever of the three happened most recently for you. For the last few years, the contribution room that we've been offered has been $6,000, and it's usually the same for everyone. Tax-free savings account is a bit of a misleading name because you can actually do so much more with it. You can think of the TFSA as a bucket, and inside it, you can hold a simple savings account paying you interest, or you can hold investments like stocks or exchange traded funds and avoid paying taxes on the gains that you have on your stocks.
Great. I like that analogy of a bucket. And actually, let's talk about another type, which is the RRSP, which is the Registered Retirement Savings Plan.
Right. So an RRSP is similar in the sense that you can use it to save or invest, and you don't pay taxes on the growth in the account. What's special though about RSPs is that the money you deposit into the account creates an income tax deduction. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, your income this year is $50,000 and you put $5,000 into the RSP. You'll pay taxes that year as if you made $45,000 in income. So ultimately paying less in tax. Now, when you eventually take the money out, the reverse happens. So the money you've withdrawn is added back onto your income. And so you pay tax on it at that point. So the key to really using an RSP is to put money in when you're making more and paying higher taxes, and then taking the money out when you're making less and paying less in taxes. An RSP does also have a limit to how much you can contribute. And that limit is, it's different than the TFSA, which, gives the same limit to everyone. An RSP bases your limit on your previous year's income. So usually you can contribute about 18% of your previous year's income up to a certain limit, which for this year is about $29,000.
Awesome. So the next account sounds similar, but I know they're different. Can we talk about the RESP, which is the Registered Education Savings Plan?
Right. Yeah. So the RESP can help just about anyone save for a child's post-secondary education. But you can also open one for yourself. So similar to other registered accounts, the money in the account grows tax-free. And there's a lifetime contribution limit of $50,000 as opposed to an annual limit. Contributions that you make to this account, though, are not tax deductible. The real benefit of an RESP is that you can receive grants from the government to help fund the beneficiary's education. So for modest income families, you can actually receive $2,000 from what's called the Canada Learning Bond without having to make even a single contribution to the RESP. And then there's also the Canada Education Savings Grant, where every year the government would match 20% of your deposit up to a yearly maximum grant of about $500. And then there's also a lifetime maximum of $7,200.
Great. So the last registered account I'd like to talk about is the RDSP, which is the Registered Disability Savings Plan. And my understanding is that contrary to the other registered accounts, the RDSP is only available for certain people. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So the RDSP is specifically open for someone who's already eligible for the disability tax credit. In order to save for their long-term financial security. It has a few similarities with the RESP in the sense that it's usually opened for the benefit of another individual. The contributions are not tax deductible, but the account also grows tax-free. With an RDSP, you can make contributions up until the year that the beneficiary turns 59 years old. And the overall lifetime contribution limit is $200,000. The government in this case also provides a Canada Disability Savings Grant and a Canada Disability Savings Bond. The bond pays a maximum of $20,000, again, without you having to make a contribution actually to the RDSP. But the grant, the amount that you can receive from there actually depends on your the beneficiary's family's income, and then also the amount that's actually contributed to the account. So kind of depending on those factors, the maximum annual grant that you can receive is about $3,500 per year. And then the overall kind of lifetime maximum is $70,000 in the grants.
Awesome. Thank you. It sounds like if people are eligible for the disability tax credit and they open an RDSP, it's definitely worth it because it sounds like the government is actually giving them some money to put in there. So that's great. So now that we know a bit more about the different types of registered accounts, can you tell us when should we use a certain account type, and if there's any sort of rules or tips that people should keep in mind when thinking of opening one of the different registered accounts?
Right, absolutely. There are certain accounts that we've discussed that have like very specific purposes, of course, like the RDSP and the RESP. The RRSP is primarily for retirement savings, like it says in the name, but there are certain instances, of course, like buying your first home or returning to school where you actually have the opportunity to withdraw from your RSP tax-free. So you can use it for a little bit more than just saving for retirement. But a rule to keep in mind, of course, is that if you are withdrawing for one of those purposes where you're withdrawing tax-free, there is a requirement to actually pay that money back. So it's more like a loan from yourself that has no interest, no tax, no nothing. The TFSA, on the other hand, is probably the most flexible of them all. You can really use it to save for anything. When you withdraw it, there's no kind of tax implications. So and there's no implication of kind of losing contribution room if you make a withdrawal. So it really has that added layer of flexibility that the other accounts just don't have.
Great. So my understanding is that the registered accounts have different tax implications, and it sounds like these are meant to help people grow their savings or their investments. So can you tell us a bit more about what the different tax implications are for each of the 4 types? I know you mentioned it a little bit, but if we can just sort of give another overview for here.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely worth going into detail about the different tax implications. Taxes are always confusing, let alone when there's like limits and contribution and everything to keep in mind. So I guess general kind of overview with all the registered accounts, the money in the account grows tax-free. So no taxes on interest income, dividends, or the gains in the account. For the TFSA specifically, the money goes in post-tax, which just means that you're not getting a tax deduction for what goes in there. But then that also means that when you take the money out, it's withdrawn tax-free, which gives it that flexibility that we mentioned. Then the RRSP, in contrast, the money goes in pre-tax. Because you're receiving the tax deduction on the contribution that's going in there. But of course, you're eventually going to pay tax on the amount that you withdraw from the account eventually. The RESP, when you make a withdrawal, the contributions, they come out tax-free, but the growth in the account and the grants that the beneficiary received, they're technically taxable to the beneficiary. So maybe like this is a one point that is often overlooked, but for the most part, a school-going beneficiary has little to no income, so the money is usually withdrawn tax-free. And then finally, the RDSP, similar idea, very similarly taxed to the RESP, where, of course, contributions are not tax deductible, but when withdrawals are taken from the account, the contributions are withdrawn tax-free, but the portion that's made up of grants, bonds, or investment income, that's again taxable to the beneficiary.
Great. That's really interesting to know the difference. For sure, it's something to keep in mind when we're looking to open these types of accounts, which it leads well into my next question. So if people are looking to open one of these registered accounts, where can they go, and what sort of things should they consider when selecting a financial institution that provides these types of registered accounts?
Yeah, really important question. Most financial institutions offer all of these accounts. So you can very likely approach your existing bank or financial institution if you're already working with one. The exception might be RDSPs, which are not always offered by every institution. For example, from the ones that we've discussed so far, Wealthsimple doesn't offer RDSPs just yet. The most important thing that I recommend taking note of when you're exploring different financial institutions is to make note of fees. I always recommend kind of keeping your fees below 1%, just so that you're benefiting as much as possible from the growth of these accounts and it's not going in someone else's pocket. But specifically from my experience, for accounts like our ESPs, there are certain providers that will, for example, take a portion of the grants as a fee, or they'll require you to forfeit a portion of the grants if you decide to move to another institution down the line. And so 18 years is a long commitment to stay in one place. But these are really kind of like the types of rules that are important to be aware of when you're going with any provider, just making sure you understand the fees and kind of the different costs that you might face by using this account, eventually moving away. If that happens to be the case, it's really important to get as much information about the costs as possible.
Wow, what an insightful conversation. We've learned so much, and I'm wondering if people want to learn more about registered accounts or even other financial topics, where can they go?
Yeah, there's definitely a ton of information online. But for example, the Canada.ca website actually has a lot of really helpful information on registered accounts and also many other finance topics, which is a little bit surprised to see, but they've got some stuff on like budgeting and like kind of, the standard ones. They've got some really good stuff over there. But you can also look at articles that are shared by financial institutions, like Wealthsimple, for example. We have a lot of articles on many different finance topics that are usually explained in a bit more of a simple way. We know finance can be a bit complex sometimes, so if you're looking for kind of more simple explanations, looking at articles from Wealthsimple, for example. But otherwise, if you're looking at even articles from other financial institutions, you can trust that kind of the information in them is accurate, it's trustworthy, it's been vetted. So definitely I'd recommend those. But I'd also say that there's a lot of helpful, for example, like YouTube videos from like personal finance experts that are out there nowadays that explain everything just in such a friendly way. So really recommend kind of exploring different types of resources depending on what works best for you and your learning style.
Awesome. It sounds like there's a lot of information out there, so that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Shez, for joining me today. You've helped us gain so much insight into registered accounts, and it really enlightens us. And it might seem complicated, but at the end, if you take your time to learn it, it's pretty simple and it works out to your advantage, right? So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me, Danica.